You are listening to the Amateur Church Podcast, where we pursue excellence in ministry with the right motivation for the sake of love. I'm Pastor Matt, and I'm so thankful that you're on this disciples journey with me as we walk through the book of Deuteronomy this week. And we've been going through Deuteronomy, looking at it from a perspective of being a sermon, but also a legal covenant document between God and his people, the Israelites. We've looked at theological truths, asked some devotion questions, but today I want to hit an apologetic issue. Now, when I mention apologetics every Wednesday, we understand that apologetics is about defending our faith. And it can range from a number of issues about creation or conscience, ethical issues, to why is this included in the Bible, why is this not? Many different questions that are asked by many Christians, believers who want to know God better and want to strengthen their faith, and by many critics who are actually attempting to discredit Christianity and the Bible, but ultimately we can give answers for the reason that we believe. In fact, 1 Peter 3:15 reminds us that we should be ready always to give a defense. That's the word apologia, a defense for our faith. And remember that as we dive into apologetics, our aim is not to love apologetics, but to love Jesus and love the people that we are answering. And so one of the questions that comes up really from the book of Deuteronomy deals with the death of Moses. This is one of the most asked questions that I get when it comes to this text and really the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, and that is, why did Moses have to die before they entered the promised land if all he did was hit a rock? Look at Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 1. It says, "Now Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, and all Naphtali, and all the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, and the Negev, and the plain in the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And then the Lord said to him, This is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord." And we get the end of chapter 34, shares the burial process and then the mourning for Moses. And yet a question is asked. When you relate this story to the book of Numbers, you find out, why did God not let Moses go in and just see the promised land? And God tells Moses, because when Moses struck the rock, instead of talking to the rock, speaking to the rock, God said, you have sinned against me. The anger of Moses against the people of Israel and the disbelief of God's word, he ultimately sinned against God, was the reason that God said you are not going into the promised land. Now, some people, very well-meaning, will respond with, well, that just seems kind of mean. It doesn't seem fair. Why, after all of the time that Moses spent, 40 years in the wilderness with the Israelites, he's the great deliverer, why does God not just let this slide? Why doesn't he just let him go into the promised land? And I want to give you 5 major reasons today. Maybe this is a question you've never asked, and just you want to think through today. Maybe it relates to even, why does God allow us to go through certain consequences? Or maybe you've asked this question before and not received a satisfactory answer, and you're wondering, we see the death of Moses, why? Well, 5 reasons. Number 1, because God is holy. I want you to see this. I want you to grasp this, that when we are looking at this text, we must understand that this is about God, not Moses. God declared to Moses, this is what I want you to do. And many have said, well, all he did was strike the rock. Well, that's not all he did, but let's say that was simply The only thing he did, he hit a rock and didn't and just didn't listen to God on this one thing. Let's say it was the only sin that Moses may have ever committed, even though we know that Moses murdered a guy and all this and that. Let's say that that was all he did. The one sin of hitting a rock when God told you to speak to it is worthy of death, worthy of punishment, because it's not the action or activity, it is the one who is sinned against. And God is holy, therefore sin is deadly. I know it may not sound fair, but any action or activity against God is deserving of death. Why? Because of the greatness of his character. We don't see the severity of sin many times because we really don't grasp the true holiness of God. He is holy, holy, holy. Now, I said this isn't all he did, in that the striking of the rock was actually a foreshadowing. Christ is called the rock. And Moses hit the rock a previous time when he was told to. But the Messiah, Christ, was not to be struck twice, only once. And in this, Moses defied not only a personal command, but a prophetic charge that Jesus Christ would be struck one time for all sins. And so this had even massive ramifications of prophecy. But again, the point is not the prophetic message. It is the truth that God is holy. Second, and let me just say, that in and of itself would be reason enough for Moses to die before going to the promised land. Second, though, is because Joshua is to step up to leadership. Look at the end of chapter 34 and you find out that Joshua is the one that has been trained, and there is a time where one generation will pass and another generation is to step up and lead. Moses is not the hero of the story. The Israelites are not going to be built on Moses' ministry. Moses leads now to Joshua. We have seen the death of Miriam. We have seen the death of Aaron. We have seen the death of all the Israelites before except Caleb and Joshua. But Joshua is now to step up to leadership. And so there may be some, even listening today, that you are looking at your eventual close of ministry or close of leadership or even closing of life one day. And what we need to realize is that we are called to raise up a next generation. This is a key reason for the death of Moses outside the promised land, because Joshua has been called to step up. And leading us to our third reason, if Joshua is called to leadership, what is he leading in? Battles are to be fought even in the promised land. This is one reason that I do not relate the promised land to heaven, simply because there are battles in the promised land. Promised land to me speaks of, if we're going to allegorize it, if you, and I don't say we should do that with every text, but if you were to allegorize the spiritual life of a believer, Canaan, promised land, would not be heaven to me. It would be the Christian life. It would be the battles that are seen in the promised land. We face those in our Christian life. There are no battles in heaven. So I would draw a distinction there. But battles are to be fought. Moses does not have to face those battles. That I want you to consider this. We think the end-all be-all of this story is getting them to promised land. That is not the end. That is just the beginning for them as a new nation. And wouldn't you consider, Moses has already fought the battles he needed to fight? He's already been for 120 years on this sinful, wretched planet. And he has endured not only the grumbling, complaining of the nation of Israel, but even deception and betrayal and criticism by Korah and by Aaron and Miriam and by others. That Moses deserves a break. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but death for Moses would be better than facing the battles in the promised land. Why? Because fourthly, heaven is better. Now, again, you may say, well, he didn't go immediately to heaven. He went to Abraham's bosom, paradise. Well, even that is better. I want you to think of this, okay? That promised land was an end goal for the Israelites to get out of the wilderness, but it is not the end goal for Israel. ultimately, the presence of God is the end goal. And remember what Moses prayed for. He said, God, I want to see your glory. I want your glory. Show me your glory. 3 times Moses declares that. And he only gets to see the back of God, whatever that even means. But what we find out in this story is that the death of Moses is not the end of Moses. If we hold fast to biblical theology, hold fast to a biblical worldview, we know that there is life after death. There is the resurrection. And we see in this that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Even God reminding Moses of the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob shows that he is the God of the living. Jesus would later refer to this in proving to the Sadducees that there is a resurrection. So come back, recap on these 4 reasons. Why did Moses die outside the promised land? Well, number 1, because God is holy and sin had to be dealt with. Number 2, Joshua is to step up to leadership. The next generation matters. Number 3, battles are to be fought, and Moses did not have to endure those battles. Number 4, heaven is better than the promised land. And so we must understand that. We must have this hope that we will get to be in God's presence. Let me give you a 5th final reason that I think encompasses all of this. Why do we see this story, and why does it seem unfair to us? Well, it may seem unfair, but let me just share with you the number 1 reason I believe that we get this type of end to the story in Deuteronomy, and that is because Jesus is better. Because Jesus is better. We see the failure of Moses in the wilderness because he is not the Messiah. Again, the Israelites were not going to be built on his ministry. They still revere him as this great prophet, but there would be a greater prophet. There would be the great King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And Jesus could do what Moses could not do. He would be the priest, the great high priest. Jesus would sinlessly make the way up the mountain and die for the sins of the world. Moses went up the mountain, but he himself sinned. And so therefore Jesus is better. And that's a good reminder from this passage that we do not put our hope in a man. We don't put our hope in a pastor. We don't put our hope in a church. We don't put our hope in an organization. You do not put your hope in your spouse or your family. You put your hope in Jesus Christ. So remember today, in order to defend this book, this Bible, and defend the faith, defend Christianity, we must be people of the book, and we must understand theologically, God is holy and sin is deadly. Joshua, this next generation, his leadership mattered. Battles that are fought in Canaan land, listen, they are fought in our lives, and we need to be prepared for those. Heaven is better. But ultimately, Jesus is better. He is our hope. And his death, burial, and resurrection allows us to have the greatest hope. I want to close out today with a ministry moment in thinking about the passing on of a torch or a legacy from Moses even to Joshua. And we'll see that even more next week in the book of Joshua. But my ministry moment today is the Mississippi Baptist Foundation. That's, of course, part of our Southern Baptist Convention. It's through the Baptist building here in Jackson, Mississippi. But it's led by Dr. Daniel Hall. And one of the ministries that they take part in, and they do so much, and I encourage you to look up the Mississippi Baptist Foundation, go online, and I've had Dr. Daniel Hall come to the church before, and we'll do that again soon to talk about leaving a legacy, and not only to support Mississippi Baptists, but especially retired Mississippi Baptist pastors and their families, widows and widowers, but also in leaving a legacy and through our wills, and realizing that the money that we use even today to support to support those in need can actually be left not through our jobs while we're alive, but through our wills after we pass on, that we actually have assets that could be used for the kingdom. And so when I think about, like I said, Moses passing on a legacy to Joshua and Joshua stepping up to leadership, many influential, especially Southern Baptists, but many influential Christians have done so through the Mississippi Baptist Foundation. And I would like to this is a shout out to Dr. Daniel Hall, one of my former professors through New Orleans Seminary Extension in Clinton. Taught me Old Testament, and I'm grateful for him and grateful for the work that they do at the Baptist building in Jackson. Hey, today as we close out, just remember your ministry matters, your leadership matters, and just like Moses was used, you can be used by God in your particular sphere of influence. But remember, Jesus is better, and he's the one that we want to please and serve. I love you. I'm praying for you. Stakes in the ground.